Welcome to today's episode of the Working Wisdom podcast series, brought to you by the C.T. Bauer College of Business at the University of Houston. We're having a conversation about work-life balance, how to navigate and overcome challenges within your career, and how to make business more accommodating to a diverse workforce.
Hi, my name is Kelly McCormick, and I am here today with Melanie Jones, the founder and CEO of Marketing Interface. She also was a social media strategist for Waste Management and director of marketing for the Surge Accelerator. She has a bachelor's in international development studies from McGill and an MBA from Rice University. And all of that led up to her creating this company, Marketing Interface. And so I'm kind of giving you the brief intro here, talking about you while I'm talking to you. But I wanted to hear more too from your perspective of how you got to that position, not necessarily just what you did, but why you decided to make the changes you did, and what led you down this path. So,
sure. So, I grew up here in Houston and absolutely hated it and could not wait to get out. And so I decided to go to college in Montreal in Canada, even though I had no ties there. And when I graduated, I really wanted to stay. The 40 below weather didn't scare me off at that point. And I needed to get a work visa to stay in the country. And so I had a sales job for about 9 months, and it was terrible. I hated sales. It was a lot of cold calling, but I really kind of liked the general direction of it. And so then I kept thinking I think marketing might be a really good fit. I studied liberal arts when I was in undergrad. And so I liked studying people and what makes them tick and how to reach them, which turned out to be a really great fit for marketing. Not that I had any idea at the time. So I ended up getting a job with a company there that did digital marketing and a very specific type called affiliate marketing. And they had software that ran these affiliate programs. And so I got to learn how to build marketing strategies and how to execute marketing strategies and all these awesome things in digital that were still fairly new at the time. And after a few years there, which was a lot of fun, and I got to be a department manager and learned all sorts of stuff, I had enough of Canadian winters and decided to move back here to Houston, which is when I went to Rice. I loved the digital space, thought I wanted to stay with startups, but tested that. My waste management stint was an internship with social media. But because my heart was with startups when I graduated, that's why I joined Surge and got to be their director of marketing and blend these interests of entrepreneurship and tech and marketing all together. And then after a couple of years of being surrounded by entrepreneurs, I was like, you know what? I need to do this for myself, which is when I started Marketing Interface, which was in late 2014 now. So it's been 3 years.
Well, that's awesome. And when you first started Marketing Interface, I know you said that you'd been around entrepreneurship, you wanted to try it yourself, but I guess what made you take that leap, and then what were you thinking about at that time? Were there any concerns? Were there any issues that you were or anything that you were thinking that just made you actually go and take the entrepreneurship route?
So I think part of it is that I had a lot of support from people that were doing it. And I think a lot of times for people, they sit in jobs where they have like a steady paycheck, and they're surrounded by people that have steady paychecks and these awesome, nice benefits and this kind of stuff. And so they get, it's a safe place to stay, and it's really safe depending on your responsibilities. But I was still at a point where I'm like, yeah, no mortgage and no kids, and I can take this risk. And it was totally the norm for me. I mean, there's like that, I can't remember if there's like an actual rule, but psychologists have studied this, where you end up being like the 5 people you hang out with the most. And so I think it was the norm for me to take on that risk and to not know where the next paycheck was coming from and to give it a shot. I also recognized that I had built through Surge a really good network in Houston. So that made it a little less scary because I knew people to go talk to about it. And then I think the other difference was someone forwarded me a link to a webinar on MarTech, which I had never heard of before, marketing technology. And it's a fairly new sector in marketing. It's taking up a lot of marketing departments' budgets. And so when I looked in Houston, nobody was really touching this. And so I saw it as a big opportunity. I went and tested the waters and got positive feedback on it.
From the perspective of just learning a little bit more about what you do, what exactly do you do with your clients when they come in, since it is probably a little different from what larger clients do? But
yeah, so, and this is, I think, the biggest thing that has changed over time. So when I started working with clients, the ones I worked with very early on had a very clear idea of what marketing they wanted to go do and why. They just didn't necessarily know the easiest ways to do it or how to automate something, or they didn't want to be the one who is in charge. Like, their time's better used somewhere else. And then as time went on, more and more of my clients said, you know what, I don't actually know what it is that I want to do. I know that we need to do marketing. So typically when I start working with a new client, the way that we build their strategy, especially for a startup where you still have probably 100 different hypotheses of what you're testing to see who your customer, everything from who your customer is to how are you going to reach them. We go through, it typically takes about 5 or 6 weeks to go through this exercise, but we build out what's called a customer journey map, a nice marketing buzzword. But we get on one page a pretty in-depth description about their target customer segment. And I have them pick only one or two segments. And then we go through 6 different stages of someone becoming a customer, everything from before they know about the company through to advocacy. So when they actually become a paying customer, that's like the 4th out of the 6th step, because we want to make sure that companies at least have thought about how do we make someone loyal, or how do we turn someone into, marketing our company. And we walk through, okay, so what does this person need, and how are they feeling, and how engaged are they with us? And then what are the channels at that specific stage that we can use to reach them? What tools do we need to use to make this easier to both go execute it and measure it? And then, what are the key metrics how are we going to evaluate this? So what happens is that tends to shake out, here are a core group of strategies and tactics that we can focus on for 3 to 6 months. That's typically the kind of like where we stop. And that first phase is just starting to identify the functionality that they need.
That's great. And for the company, what are your next steps in mind? Like, what's your future goals for Marketing Interface?
That's a good question. So I've got some ideas, but there's only one that I'm sharing, and it's very, very early stage. So my big vision for it, I'm still not sharing, but I've got a newsletter and a Facebook page that I'm building out called the Marketers Academy, which is building out a community and a resource for people who are new to marketing that need to learn a lot of things in a short period of time. And it's specifically for people that are working at a small or medium-sized business, because odds are that you're not getting big corporate training. You don't necessarily have another person to turn to. I've been the marketing department of one. And marketing is really one of those fields where you need someone to bounce an idea off of, or say like, hey, I think we've got this problem. Most of the time, there's not one way to fix something. And so it's just helpful if you haven't had that training to have kind of this resource or people that you can go talk to.
That sounds great. That would be super helpful, I think, for all of those small and medium businesses. I just think that marketing is one of those things that oftentimes people think they might have a good idea of how to do it, and then they jump into it, and it's like, wow, this is a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. We're actually going to take a quick break to hear a word from our sponsors. We'll be right back with Melanie Jones, the founder and CEO of Marketing Interface.
Got an idea for a startup? Red Labs is the University of Houston's co-working space, startup accelerator, and technology entrepreneurship program. Supported by Bauer's Wolf Center for Entrepreneurship, we work with UH-affiliated founders to turn your technology startup ideas into high-growth ventures. We provide free co-working space, access to mentors and resources in the startup community, and customized startup curriculum. For more information, visit redlabs.bauer.uh.edu.
Okay, we're back with How Do They Do It? Working Wisdom from Bauer College of Business podcast, where we hear about people who are doing amazing things in their careers and lives. And I'm with Melanie Jones, the founder and CEO of Marketing Interface. And we've been talking a little bit about her career and what she's done up to this point, what she's doing now. And now I'm just going to transition a little bit into talking about the startup and entrepreneurship industry in terms of women in entrepreneurship, because I teach women in entrepreneurship at the University of Houston, and so I'm interested in hearing more about what you've seen as challenges or barriers for women in entrepreneurship, and I suppose the different opposite side of the coin too, like what are some opportunities for women in entrepreneurship? And tech.
So, yes. So I think the opportunities are there. I think there's some interesting differences. With the Me Too movement being so popular, I think anybody that thinks that tech isn't getting it, you're probably not reading any news, because there's all these stories coming out of Silicon Valley. But I think what's unique to me about the startup world and tech scene is how much business is done at happy hours or in people's personal time. And, at Surge, people are like, oh, you're just so friendly. Well, some people can take that the wrong way and misinterpret your friendliness. I'm like, well, if a guy was that friendly, you wouldn't think that they're interested in you, but it happens. I think there are a few really bizarre things that happen, but I think one of the weirder things I was told at Surge was, one guy who was meeting as the director of marketing and had me serve him a coffee, sat there while I made him coffee, which was weird. And then halfway through meeting with him to find out whether or not he wanted to be a mentor, whether or not we wanted him as a mentor, he said, he cut me off and said, are you married? And I said, no. I'm thinking, okay, this is really weird for a business conversation. And he goes, oh my gosh, well, you must just love being in this environment surrounded by all these rich, successful men. Wow. I don't know how to respond to that. I don't think people teach you, hey, when someone makes inappropriate comments like that, here's how you handle it. So I think part of it is because there's some additional blurred lines, whereas if you're in a corporate environment, you have more structure and more regulations. There's a lot of gray area that people either navigate well or don't navigate well. And I think people are still kind of trying to figure out, okay, we're more casual, we meet at happy hours, but it's still a professional context. And so I think that's kind of going to be an interesting challenge for a lot of women. It's when you are operating in this gray area, how do you still go to these important events and the happy hours, where you do build networks and you build personal relationships with people, but without sending signals that are misinterpreted. And not that should even be on women to respond, to manage it. But at the end of the day, it's kind of a reality of where we're at right now, and needing to figure out this gray space that startups operate in. I think the other thing is I would be the last person to ever blame issues normally at work. Oh, that's a difference between men and women. I think a lot of times some people throw it out and it's you know what, that person is just mean, or that person's just doing that. It has nothing to do with their gender. Since starting my own company, though, I have really realized that as a female entrepreneur, the type of support that I need is very different than the type of support I've seen male entrepreneurs need. So, for instance, if I'm having a rough day or I need some help motivating myself, I'm really disciplined, so it's not an issue to sit down at my computer, but feeling happy about it. I love reading stories about other women that have been successful. So I have these books on female entrepreneurs all over my house, because when I'm kind of feeling a bit blah, that's the thing that motivates me and makes me really happy. It's just yes, other people have felt like this too, and they've gotten through it. And I've joined a few communities for female entrepreneurs, and they've been a huge help, because sometimes you just need those cheerleaders. But women tend to get it a little bit differently than men do. And so I think that's also been an interesting perspective to me. And not to say all female entrepreneurs are the same. And I don't think we can just kind of paint everyone with a broad brush like that. But that's just been my experience. So the kind of support I needed or wanted has been different than what I've seen my male entrepreneur friends need along the way.
Yeah, I completely agree. And actually, after hearing you talk about this, I feel like I have many more questions that just came out of that story. But one of them being, how do you go about finding those networks or communities that are supportive?
So because I do a lot of work online, the communities that I've plugged into a bit more are more online communities than in-person ones. When I was starting Marketing Interface, I joined, I think, 8 or 9 different professional associations, most of them in Houston. So everything from the Women's Energy Network to specific marketing groups. And I just went and tested them out because you don't know what you're going to respond to until you've actually gone to their events and met the other members, that kind of thing, and figured it out. And I think that, so for me personally, I found the online ones work better than in-person ones a lot of the time. But one of the main ones that I found, and I think I just found it from searching or through Facebook or something like that, was this group called the Female Entrepreneurs Association. But the content that they put out is amazing. And they've got this network of over 5,000 women that are part of it. And so, but again, it was like, I heard about it, tested it out. I personally really liked it, so I stayed a part of it. But you have to kind of go identify, I think, both by function and then by general interest. But I think a lot of times if you have a particular, like if you have your job title on Facebook, you'll start getting Facebook ads that are targeted towards you. So if you're an entrepreneur in a marketing agency, you'll just start getting those ads showing to you.
That is definitely true. I feel like as soon as I type something into my search bar, suddenly all of the ads are directed to that specific search. So I can imagine changing anything on your Facebook profile would lead to the same thing. But you also mentioned when you're becoming an entrepreneur that networking and meeting people to become clients is also really important. And something that I've found while just reading about women entrepreneurs is that a lot of times women aren't as good at promoting themselves, but they're really good at promoting other women, which is why I think part of being in those networks is great and a really good opportunity. But how did you go about finding your first clients too? Was that networking opportunities or just knowing people or meeting people?
So my first client was Mercury Fund. And so I knew them from Surge. And I walked in, and I knew the team really well from Surge. I walked in on the Friday before Christmas that year, like right after I had like just gotten my company formation papers, and I had made peppermint bark, and I don't cook or bake. And I remember making this peppermint bark to give me an excuse to go into their office to say hello and see how they were doing. And I thought, man, I was like, no self-respecting guy would ever like make peppermint bark so they could walk in and have this meeting. And I didn't have a meeting on the book. But I walked in and one of the partners was there. And again, because I had known him at that point for a couple of years, I was just like, hey, I just wanted to wish you, happy holidays. And he's like, oh, so what are you up to now? And it was a nice lead-in to tell him what I was doing. I honestly didn't even think that they would be a client. I was hoping, I was like, maybe they'd have either ideas about do they think my business would work or not? Maybe they would be able to make some introductions for me, maybe. And it turns out that they wanted some help with their marketing. And so that I got my first clients by making peppermint bark and just walking into an office. And then for the most part, a lot of my clients were either people that, again, like I can't stress the importance of like, especially early on in a career, which I had appreciated, like go have jobs where you're going to meet the most amount of people and you can go build up a professional network. I mean, it's golden. But a lot of ways like that are through referrals. And I think actually a lot of co-working locations are now starting, they've got great networks that they're building up of their members and getting referrals that way. And then I've done, like a few public speaking engagements and that kind of thing where I've gotten to talk and show off my expertise and met some clients that way.
Well, I think that sounds like very good advice to build up the network early, to focus on professional network and professional growth early. I also, at some points, look back and think like I maybe should have started thinking about that earlier on in my career.
2020 hindsight is amazing. And, the other funny thing though, Kelly, is like I've talked to people kind of past their initial first years as professionals. And I think a lot of people, and I've talked about this, and I feel like I've gone through it too. It's like in the early years where it's like, yes, I need to go network and be at every networking event. And you just kind of hit this point where you're like, you know what? I'm seeing the same people at every event. I still want a presence. I still want to be known. And I want to have relationships with these people, but that doesn't mean I have to go to every networking event. And if I'm at every networking event, people don't actually think I'm doing any work. So it's like you get to find that balance where it's like, you know what? I can choose I'm now much pickier about how I spend my time, and where I spend it. But yeah, networking so important.
I think that that's important as well, because what you just said about being picky about where you spend your time. I also notice the farther I go in my career, you just kind of have other opportunities that come to you, and your instinct is to say yes to every single thing that comes your way, because it either sounds like a great opportunity, or you're working with someone cool, or you're getting more money or something like that. But I'm learning that if I don't say no to some things that aren't right for me, that I start getting stressed, and I'm suddenly, not sleeping and not doing all the things that I need to do to make myself successful at the things that I care about. So, and I think that's really important too. Have you just started doing more of that after you realize that about it?
And it's hard. It's hard to say no to stuff, because you want to be excited and help people with their missions. But I think there's also this attitude where I'm like, you know what? Because I'm a consultancy, and so my clients are paying for my time, so I have to be really careful about what I'm doing for free. And I think that there are a lot of people, especially, and I think, I love working with startups, but a lot of times startups are like, hey, can you do this work for free? I'm like, well, no, because my clients are paying me to do that, so I can't just give that away to you. But it's hard. Or a lot of times they'll say, well, can you work for equity? I'm like, no. I'd be nice, but no. It's not a good incentive. I don't recommend entrepreneurs do that. But saying no, it's so hard. And there was some big book that came out, I think a year or two ago, from Shonda Rhimes, like the woman that wrote Grey's Anatomy and all these TV shows. That was her year of saying yes. And so she challenged herself for a whole year to say yes to everything. But that's because apparently she was so far the opposite. She said no to everything. That she tried to challenge herself the opposite way. I'm like, well, you're one of the few people I know who have that problem. I feel like most people, and honestly, in a lot of the female entrepreneur groups that I'm part of, it's a pretty common theme. A lot of women feel very uncomfortable with setting boundaries and saying no. They think it's like this myth that we all have to run ourselves into the ground, I think, to be successful. Or that, I think sometimes people don't value their time as much as they should. And your passion projects, those are important too. So,
yeah, I think it's always going to be uncomfortable for me to say no, but I do think one of the things that's helped a little bit is really just seriously sitting down and writing, outlining the things that are important to me, and being like, these are the things I'm going to focus on. And if it's not one of these things, then it's a great opportunity, and I want to express to that person how grateful I am for it. But that is not something
you're not the right person.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Working Wisdom podcast series from the C.T. Bauer College of Business, brought to you by the Working Families Initiative. The initiative aims to provide support and access for women in business school and the workforce, and to generate research that organizations can use to implement policies and standards to benefit a diverse workforce. For more information about Bauer College and this podcast series, visit www.bauer.uh.edu/podcast.